Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. As many of you know, most of our events are held at the Lux Sunset Boulevard Hotel. We will continue to have events at that location as in the same frequency, and hope to have some events here because of people who live further into the West Valley felt that the drive to the Lux was burdensome. So we were hoping to get a location that would be more doable for them. Also, we're all aware of the horror that the 405 is right now, and Sunset Boulevard is going to be like closed for 120 days, unbelievably. And I looked at the detours and they made me crazy, just reading them. So I can imagine what it would be like driving them at this time. So anyway, but they do keep telling us that we're going to be ecstatic when with the outcome. Of course, that remains to be seen. Okay, Steve Goldberg and I have wanted to organize a retrospective on Meir Kahane for almost 2 years, and clearly we were on to something. In the 7 years the Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors has been hosting events, we have never had such a response to any event announcement as we have had for this one. There were, of course, a few, but a very few, nasty emails. But the overwhelming majority of emails, well over 100, were emails expressing gratitude for bringing up his name, especially in this time in history. I've had more inquiries about the availability of a YouTube video for this event than for all of our other events combined. Wow. Meir Kahane was 7 years old when my father, Meir Wise, and his family were taken from their home and moved into the Lodz ghetto. He was 12 when my father was taken to Auschwitz. I wonder how things would have been different, what the history of the Jewish people in Europe would have been had Meir Kahane been the man he became as an adult during that dark, dark period. Our speaker tonight, Stephen Goldberg, was counsel to the Jewish Defense League when it was still active. He will discuss Meir Kahane's legacy and whether the Jewish people need the movement he started to be revived. You will see videos of Meir Kahane that will make you understand who and what he was. There's a handout for tonight, which is a printout of a Playboy interview, which is actually a PDF directly from the magazine. It was before the days of having it online. That was sent to me from a friend from his private files, and there's also a review of a bio written by Kahane's wife, Libby Kahane. If you don't have one, it's going to be posted on my website. Steve is an active and passionate supporter of Israel and a strong Zionist. I am grateful to Steve for his friendship and for the knowledge and commitment he brings to bear on issues of importance to Israel and to the Jewish community. The most important point that I always make about Steve is that he has no family in Israel and no direct ties to the Holocaust, yet he understands well the significance of the existence of the Jewish state of Israel to Jews everywhere. Steve is a model for American Jews who need to understand the historical precariousness of our survival. Steve will take your questions following the presentation. Please turn off your cell phones and other electronic devices. It is my pleasure to introduce Steve Goldberg.
Thank you, Doris. Before I get into substance, we're going to put a video up which is going to answer the question if we need another Kahane now. Just watch this video taken in Jerusalem at the very end of 2012, beginning 2013. That sickening display on King George Street in Jerusalem that just happened of Arab young men, teenage thugs, tormenting religious Jews is something that we could have seen in Germany in the 1930s. It happened in the heart of Jerusalem with somebody filming it, people driving and walking past. I've been on that street many times. Nobody did anything. There's something, my first point is something is deeply ill in the Jewish world when that's allowed to happen. And I believe that's going to be, that's a key theme and something that Meir Kahane attempted to stop and prevent. Let's go further. I'm going to do something else introductory, which is emblematic of something important.
That was last winter.
That was last winter. That was just recently in Jerusalem. But hold on, I'll take it. One of the problems is the American Jewish establishment, the leaders of the organizations that exist now that also existed in the 1930s and 1940s. And I'm going to give you one that makes me sad to do because it's an organization I'm a part of. I'm the National Vice Chairman of the Zionist Organization of America, ZOA, which I typically consider to be correct and right and principled on most issues. When they found out I'm speaking about Meir Kahane, I got this email. We're aware of your upcoming public address. Please stress that your remarks are your own. You are not delivering them in your role as an officer of the ZOA, and the content of your speech does not reflect the official opinions of the Zionist Organization of America.
Time to quit.
Maybe. But that's also, when I'm going to get back to that topic and what Rabbi Kahane was trying to correct and address, which is the weakness and cowardice of the American Jewish establishment. Let's start, Meir Kahane, who was he? Hold on. He was born in 1932. He was raised in a revisionist Zionist household. He met Peter Bergson when he was a teenager. He was arrested for throwing tomatoes at Ernest Bevin from Great Britain, who was trying to block the Jews from entering Palestine at the time during World War II to escape the Holocaust. And he founded the Jewish Defense League in 1968. And I remember as a teenage boy in New York seeing a magazine, the New York Times magazine, a full-page photo of Kahane with a lot of tough-looking Jewish guys. With the caption was, "Is this any way for nice Jewish boys to behave?" And these nice Jewish boys had chains and bats and clubs. And what they were doing was escorting elderly Jews in Brooklyn to and from shul on Shabbat because they were being harassed by ghetto youths, much like we saw there. And because of these young JDL guys, then the elderly Jews were able to go safely back and forth. He then began, and that became, he was of course considered violent and thuggish, and the American Jewish establishment were tuss, we don't behave this way, but it was absolutely vital that this happened. Then he also began to take on the neo-Nazi party. And he would go to where they were going to be rallying because he thought that was also offensive. And I remember that there was going to be a march in Skokie, Illinois, which was a place where a lot of Holocaust survivors went to live. Very Jewish, many Holocaust survivors, and the American Nazi Party was going to be marching through there just as a sign of disrespect. And Rabbi Kahane made news because he showed up with guys from the JDL to disrupt that rally, and he did disrupt it and wound up roughing up some of them. And there's a video on the news, if we could play now, the next one. This was a very early video of Kahane.
No best for all the press here. I want everybody on this half of the sidewalk, please. We're asking you to cooperate. We don't want to push and shove. Folks, step in on this side of the sidewalk.
This yellow building coward here is trying desperately to get out of marching in Skokie. We want him to. we're not interested in avoiding confrontation by having him march anywhere. He's not going to march anywhere. Nobody after Auschwitz is going to carry signs reading gas Jews anywhere. Not in Marquette Park, not in Skokie, and not anywhere. And this yellow-bellied coward, and I want all of his neighbors here to see that this is a cop-out. He's afraid to come to Skokie. Well, whether he comes to Skokie or doesn't, eventually this place is not going to be here.
Are you just inviting a confrontation though he has a legal permit to march?
I am inviting a confrontation with a person who wants to kill Jews. We are not going to wait until he gets bigger and bigger and bigger. We want the confrontation now. We want all of his groupies to see.
What purpose would that serve?
So that every single high school kid who thinks that it's a big thing to be a Nazi will see that he's nothing but a yellow coward. That's what it will serve. No one will get kicks out of being Nazis. The only kicks will be to the head.
Are you going to stay here until the game is over?
We are going to stay here, and we are going to
Sound quality was difficult. You can find that on YouTube if you look up Meir Kahane and Skokie and Nazis, but he was there to confront the Nazis who were going to be marching in a vulgar display in front of Holocaust survivors, and he was inviting a confrontation. Who's doing that today? There were also incidents with the Black Panthers at the time that were going to go into Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan, one of the oldest Reform congregation, and they were going to go in there demanding reparations from the Jews for slavery, as if the Jews were in the United States back then. And Kahane stood at the door, made a big public scene of it with a number of his JDL guys and said, they show up here and we're going to break their heads. They didn't come in. But this was Jewish self-defense and Jewish self-respect. Is there anybody doing that now? We see that happen. Anybody doing this now? Now, part of his, there was a philosophy behind this. It was not just him being violent, him being primitive. He believed the Jews should be like any other people, not ridden by guilt, not afraid to defend themselves, to do what everybody else was supposed to be doing. So again, there's a video with his own words, because I can't say it as well as he does. I want to play another video of what he said about guilt.
Rabbi, you wrote in a piece that was published in the New York Times about a year ago now, there is a specter haunting Israel and its American Jewish supporters. It's called guilt. What did you mean?
We Jews, having lived for 100 years in an exile with no state of our own, and suffered all that we have suffered, have come to so much need to be loved that we feel guilty about everything, that whether we have done it or haven't done it. This guilt over the Palestinians. Guilt. Since 1920, they have attempted to murder Jews. This problem didn't begin in 1967. In 1929, the Arabs massacred 67 Jews in one day in Hebron. What was troubling them in 1929? The occupied lands of 1967? In 1947, they turned down the UN partition plan, which would have given them a state called Palestine, and a much larger state than it would have taken in more than the West Bank and Gaza. It would have taken much of what is now Israel. They said no. They went to war. They began 4 wars with us. And we feel guilty. The Palestinians would massacre us if they could. Now, if Jews feel guilty about shooting Arabs every single day, and if they feel guilty about beating up Arabs, then they should ask themselves, what is more humane? Doing what I say, transferring them out of the country into Jordan and letting them establish their own country there called Palestine, or doing what Israel is doing now? I have no guilt about saving Jews from a horror that the Arabs would bring on us. And yet there is this incredible guilt feeling that somehow we are doing things to an innocent people. They're not innocent. They never were. And unfortunately, they never will be.
There's a lot in that very short clip. And again, let me clarify. He was asked about Jewish guilt. And he talked about it as something, it's an illness that has afflicted our people after thousands of years of living in the galut, of not having a state of our own, of being persecuted, and we've become the battered wives of the world. We blame ourselves when people don't like us. We think if only we're nicer, if only we're more generous, they won't hate us, they won't try to kill us. It must be us. With the situation with the Palestinians, which he made clear, since 1920, well before there was a state, the Arabs living in the Holy Land would go and try to massacre the Jews who lived there just because there was Jews. There was certainly nothing even could be mischaracterized as an occupation. There wasn't a Jewish state. There were simply Jews living there. In 1929 in Hebron, a rumor passed that the Jews who were attempting to attack the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount, there was a riot in Hebron and 67 Jews were murdered. Again, can't be because of an occupation of Judea and Samaria, which they later called the West Bank, happened before. It went forever. They've been attempting to massacre Jews for now close to a century. It will continue, but yet the Jews feel guilty about fighting back. Bringing to modern times, when you had the withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, which was an attempt to show good faith. We're nice guys. We're going to kick Jews out of their homes. And we're going to show we want peace. And then I remember at the time here thinking this is a bad idea. And there was what happens when rockets start to being launched because you're encouraging terrorists. The answer was the ground will shake with one rocket or missile that comes. It took thousands and thousands. Finally, there's Operation Cast Lead at the end of 2008. And the world condemned Israel anyway. And Israel comes up as a result of the Goldstone report, trying to minimize civilian casualties in a way the United States never would. We dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We took part in the Doolittle raids on Tokyo. We were involved in the firebombing in Dresden. But Israel risks its own soldiers, young people, 18, 19, 20 years old, who have to risk their lives because they can't shoot first, because they're afraid and they're ridden with guilt. That's what he's addressing. And then he addresses an answer in something no one else is saying. What's the answer to the problem? Is there ever going to be peace in the Middle East? Is there going to be a two-state solution? His answer was very clear. There's going to be no peace unless the Arabs are transferred to what was going to be the Palestinian state, which was Jordan, which was the intent at the time of the Balfour Declaration and the mandate of the League of Nations in 1922. And he also said there will be fewer deaths if that occurs. Transfers happened throughout history. They happened in India and Pakistan. They happened at the end of World War II when the German nationals were kicked out of Czechoslovakia. They happen, and sometimes it's the most humane and peaceful resolution, yet if that's advocated today, it's called racist at the time. He wasn't apologetic about trying to spare our people, the Jews, from the fate that the Arabs will inflict on them if they can. And his view is we do not feel guilty about defending ourselves. Next, his attitude towards violence. He was violence altogether. And he was considered just violent and a thug and a racist and a Jewish version of a Nazi. That wasn't his view on violence. I want to play the next clip of his words on his view on the use of violence.
I'm just trying to figure out how a man is intellectually superior to most others can reconcile his belief in violence with the nonviolence that the Old Testament and the Talmud teaches. I just find this totally incomprehensible. Thank you.
I do too. Incomprehensible that someone can get up and talk about the nonviolence of the Bible from the Talmud. Clearly you've never seen the Bible or the Talmud, or else you've been looking at a different version. Of course we hate violence. And of course violence is not a happy thing. But violence is sometimes a necessary thing. And if the Talmud says if one comes to slay you, slay him first, that's not exactly out of Gandhi or the Quakers. I don't even have to begin to recount the numbers of wars that Jews had to survive. I want all the nations to beat their swords into plowshares, that's for sure. But when my enemy has a sword, I don't want a plowshare. What kind of comparison between Jackie Robinson, who was fighting not against people who wanted to kill him, exterminate him, he was fighting for a basic right, a civil right. And by the way, the basic civil rights that blacks got in this country would not have been gained without a great deal of real struggle, So, and even that was not against people who wanted to wipe them out. Even Bull Connor in Alabama was not talking about just killing blacks. It was a question of rights. I'm facing an enemy in Israel who wants to liquidate my state. What do you want me to do? To meet people who started 4 wars with me with flowers? That's not the Bible. It's not the Talmud, and more than that, it isn't even normal.
The last comment is priceless. It's not even normal. If people are coming to kill you, you don't want a plowshare. If people are coming to kill you, it's not moral not to defend yourself. It's not moral not to defend your family. It's not moral not to defend your people. It's certainly not normal. But somehow that's been put into our mentality that we're supposed to take it. In the 1973 war, leading up to the Yom Kippur War, Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan were arrogant, and they thought there's no way the Egyptians and the Syrians would dare attack Israel after what happened in '67. But about 8 hours beforehand, they figured out this really was going to happen. They were going to get attacked. And they could have had an advantage with a preemptive strike like they got in 1967 off of Egypt. They didn't do it. They let themselves take the first blow. Why? Because Henry Kissinger didn't want them, thought they needed, for political reasons, to be hit first. And they were afraid to displease the United States. So as a result of that, on Yom Kippur, they were attacked without having attacked first. What kind of sickness is that? Who does that? He knew better. You don't allow yourself, because other people are going to be mad at you, you have to be hit first. There was an obligation to defend people. That's what he was talking about. Now we see in Israel, they've knuckled under and have freed 104, or they're going to free 104 of the worst, vilest murderers you can imagine. People who, after they killed Jews, would mutilate them and cut them into pieces. One, a 13-year-old boy, was first raped before he was killed and then cut into pieces. And the worst of the worst are going to be let go. Why? Because John Kerry asked them to. And they don't want to take the blame for no peace talks. John Kerry's desperate to have peace talks in Washington, D.C. They made clear, if you don't release, this is a condition of Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, they won't come here unless you release these people. And we're going to blame you, Israel, if you say no when there are no talks. And they caved in. It's absolutely indefensible. Somebody needs to say that. These people, it's unjust. Forget about it. It sends a bad message to the world, and now these terrorists are going to go back to it, and it's not going to lead to anything. It's not going to lead to peace. It's just immoral to do that. So sometimes you fight back. Now, one of a present minister named Naftali Bennett came up and he made a speech and he said, you know what? We shouldn't be working so hard to capture these terrorists because we're only going to let them go anyway. We should be killing them instead. We have a death penalty, they don't do that. And he said, I was in the army, I killed plenty of Arabs, no problem. They were leaping all over him, criticizing him. American Jewish organizations criticizing him. How dare he say it's okay to kill Arabs? Well, look what happens when you capture them and then give them away for nothing. Violence is a terrible thing. But again, when you're under assault and your people are under assault, it's the only way to defend yourself. Kahane knew it, and for some reason, nobody in the Jewish establishment is saying it now, and it's very rare even in the Israeli government for anyone to say anything close to that. Let's talk a little bit about Kahane's what happened with him. He formed the Jewish Defense League. It got involved in protesting the oppression of the Soviet Jews. It wound up vocally protesting, harassing and following Soviet diplomats, people from the ballet, to make a big deal about it. And it had an impact, and it had made a lot of publicity. Kahane believed in Aliyah. He was a Zionist. He went to Israel, and he started to promote his ideas, and he ran for the Knesset, and he lost. He ran a second time, and he lost. He ran a third time, and he got in. And then his party started to gain popularity. So what they did is they adopted a law saying if you're a racist, you can't run for the Knesset, you can be banned, your party can't run, and it's against the law. Now that's not applied to the Arab parties, which of course we'll talk about, the destruction of the Jewish state by itself. That was applied only once, and it was applied to Kahane to keep him out as he was gaining power. In Israel. He was there, he created the Kach party, and then ultimately he was assassinated in a hotel room in Manhattan in 1990 by an Egyptian terrorist who was tried and acquitted by a jury in Manhattan, even though it was clear he did it. He was later arrested and convicted for conspiracy for the first World Trade Tower bombings in 1993. He was part of Al-Qaeda. It was one of the first acts of Al-Qaeda terrorism in the United States. And he confessed to Kahane's murder as part of his conviction and sentencing in 1993. Then Kahane's son, in the year 2000, was killed by Arab terrorists as he was driving through, through the liberated territories. Kahane had a view on Zionism, what is important, and the key is that Hebron, all the territories in Judea and Samaria, are as important as Tel Aviv, and I'd like to play that one next, his words.
For 2,000 years, the Jewish people in exile dreamed the dream. The Jew in Poland and the Jew in Yemen, the Jew in Germany and in Morocco dreamed the dream that they called Shivat Zion, the return to Zion. A people that had been promised the land by God to a man called Abraham, who was told, get thee from thy father's house and from thy father's land, and go to the land that I shall show you. A people that lived in that land and created two states that had kings who reigned and prophets who prophesied, were driven from that land by the Romans. And not one day passed in those 20 centuries in which the Jew did not pray 3 times a day, may our eyes behold thy return to Zion. That is Zionism. It was not Theodor Herzl who created Zionism. It was Theodor Herzl's great-great-grandfather who stood by the rivers and you can fill in the name of the country, the rivers of tears of France or of Germany or of England, and said, someday we will come home, someday we will return home. We came home in 1948. We returned. We didn't come as settlers. We returned as the legal owners of a Jewish state. Of a Jewish state which includes Judea and Samaria. If we have no right to Hebron in Judea, then we certainly have no right to Tel Aviv. Abraham never walked on Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv, but he surely lived and is buried in Hebron. And our claim to a Tel Aviv, which was built in 1905, is only a valid one if we have a claim to Hebron. So for those who say that Israel needs Judea and Samaria for reasons of defense, that may be true, but that's not the reason. The reason why we should not give up 1 inch is an eminently ethical one. It belongs to us.
In all the discussions that go on now about whether there should be a trade of lands for peace, there are discussions about what does Israel need for its security. And again, of course it's true, and we've heard people talk about the topography and how dangerous it'll be to have the Palestinian Authority able to look down from Judea and Samaria into Tel Aviv, into Ben Gurion Airport, and that what happened with Gaza will happen again, but just on a much more severe scale as they hit the center of the country. Security is important, and they talk about Jordan Valley, and should there be Israeli troops or international troops. That misses the point, and he says it. The reason there should be no discussion about this is because that land is Jewish. It belongs to the Jewish people who have rights there superior to any other people. And that should be the beginning and the end of discussion. And as long as the Jews are left unmolested, in peace to live there, they won't bother anyone else. But if they're going to dare attack, then they need to be responded to, the attackers, the same way any other normal country would react if its own citizens were attacked. But the key is Jewish rights, the right to the land, and that's missing in all the conversations today, and he says it, and you hear it a little bit in Israel, but not nearly as strongly as it should be heard. Nobody's saying that loud and clear. People, and certainly not the American Jewish organizations, and not in Israel, and not the Prime Minister, and really not any Prime Minister. They talk about what's necessary to compromise. Again, who gives up half their own home to someone else? You defend it. Meir Kahane was not a perfect man. No one is. Not one of us in this room is perfect. He had his flaws. I didn't agree with him on everything. Okay, I'm a secular Jew. I didn't agree with some of his notions, but he got the important things right. Jewish rights, Jewish nationhood, the need to defend ourselves, what's moral, and he stood up to all the pressures of the organizations that simply wanted access to the White House to go to the Hanukkah party. And in the 1930s, 1940s didn't protest Roosevelt, and today join John Kerry's pressure, come and support the two-state solution, pressure the Israeli government, make clear you want them to compromise, to ask the United States, and American Jewish organizations are going along with it. And it's because of, the Holocaust happened once, and Israel's being jeopardized again. And I want to play one last video for him talking about the failure of the American Jewish establishment with the Holocaust.
I've read where you have expelled German and Austrian correspondents from news conferences that you've held. Is that true?
We have a clear rule that anyone who represents the German state radio or state TV cannot appear at my conferences.
Why is that?
I don't really throw out people. If I were to throw out every news person in Israel whom whom I thought was hostile, we'd have an empty room. That's not the point. I think that what the German people did to the Jews is not a thing that one overlooks easily. I'll certainly have coffee with the same German personally on a personal level. But as long as he represents the German state, 45 years is too short a time to forget. And I think that one of the problems of people in this country is when they say, let's forget, I think that people who don't hate evil enough guarantee that it will happen again and again. So indeed, no official representative of German state TV or state radio can appear at any of our press conferences.
Pretty powerful stuff. And he's right. When I'm in Israel, the strongest Zionists, the bravest ones, are the Christians. They don't understand why the Jews don't fight for their birthright, why they don't defend themselves. There's something in our mentality. There was a book called The Oslo Syndrome written by Kenneth Levin, who is a psychiatrist, and it was about Jewish psychological history, again, the thousands of years of persecution that lead us to think it's our fault. Kahane knew better. He was right about this. And in my view, for whatever disagreements there are on certain issues with him, for whatever flaws he had in terms of Jewish survival, defending his people, he was unique in terms of American Jewry. There's been nobody like him since then who told the truth and was assassinated as a result, and is still reviled by most of the Jewish establishment that added together doesn't have as much courage and intellectual ability as he had in his little finger. I don't know why we don't have this now. I think there is, people are afraid. A personal incident in June of 2012, the ZOA invited Pamela Geller to come speak at the Jewish Federation. June of 2012, it was cleared by the Federation, it was on their website. The day before, they call up and say, people are we're afraid their Muslims are threatening to protest. We have to cancel the speech. They made a call at 11 at night. By the time I got it, it was 7:30 in the morning, and said, she's not getting in. You're not letting, because they were afraid of Muslim protesters in front of the Jewish Federation. Now, how much was that? How much was left-wing Jews threatening not to donate? But they kept her out. They knuckled under. In Israel, they knuckle under to pressure from the United States to release murderers at our risk. Somebody, I don't know where it is, I don't have an answer to this, but somebody needs to start to tell the truth, like Kahane did. And on the college campuses where the kids are bullied by the Muslim Students Union and it's not safe to walk around with a mezuzah, you can't have it on your door, you can't have a chai or a Jewish star around your neck or a t-shirt with Hebrew writing. Somebody needs to be actively confronting those students in a physical way, make sure you're not going to do this. We don't believe in violence. We want to act in dignity. We want to treat people with respect. But if you lay a hand on one of us, brother, that's the last hand you're going to be laying on anybody for a while. I don't know why that's not happening. If anybody has any ideas how to at least get that started again, I'd love to hear it. I think it would increase pride among young Jewish people again, that we're not apologizing, we're not saying we're trying to make peace and they won't let us, at least the impression we're wrong, that we stole Arab land and now we'll give it back as long as we're safe. That shouldn't be the message that's sent. So in my view, Kahane was not a terrorist. He stood up, he was self-defense for the Jews. And he was one voice like that. It needs to come up again, and people need to be willing to speak up like that. They need to be able to go to the Temple Mount. Jews can't go to the Temple Mount to pray. The Muslims can pray. Jews go to pray, you get arrested on the Temple Mount. There's no freedom of religion for Jews on the Temple Mount. That needs to stop. And it may need actual protests whether it's the nonviolent kind or the kind where you defend yourself. That has to happen. That's my view. I think Kahane was a great man. For all my positions, I'm on the board of World Likud, I'm on the board of ZOA, I'm with Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors. I don't think Doris has any problem with me saying this. I think Kahane was a great man, and I think we miss him, and there needs to be somebody else like him. With that, if anybody, I'll finish. If anybody has any questions, let me know. I would urge you to go on YouTube and look him up. There are many longer clips. He debates Alan Dershowitz for a long time. He's good. He debates Ehud Olmert. You can watch hours and hours of him, and you'll think, this guy made sense. He was right. He predicted everything. So I'd urge you to do that as well. Thank you, and now I'll take questions.
My question is, during that first scene, where were the police?
Yeah, look, I don't know, I wasn't there. You see the video. There are police that drive around. They look away frequently. They don't want to get involved. But even if there were no police on the street for that 1 minute, somebody should have been calling them. And the Jews who were on the street, that's a very crowded street, King George Street, should have been intervening even without the police. I think somebody immediately should have called them, but whatever Jews were there should have interceded instantly to do that.
Steve, you were referring to what was happening on college campuses today. Are you familiar with CUFI?
Christians United for Israel, yes, a great organization.
There's about 90 college campuses that have groups of
CUFI organization there, the Christians, and they are trying to show the Jewish kids. Hold your hand. No, they're trying. What do you mean hold it vertical? This is vertical.
That's right.
Like that. They're trying. Okay, they're trying to show the Jewish kids that they can be Jewish on their campus and not be threatened by that, and they're trying to take the Muslim intervention away from that, and show the Jewish people that they shouldn't be praying on the prayer mats and going the wrong way. And these are Christians that you spoke of. They're the ones who are in support of Israel, and they send a lot of money to Israel as well.
Since you work with Rabbi Kahane, I wonder if you could give us some personal anecdotes that we might enjoy.
Personally, I met Kahane just I saw him in New York speak when I was a young boy. I thought he was a very charismatic speaker. I shook his hand. I worked more closely with Irv Rubin, who succeeded him here, but then I met Kahane with Rubin. He was, in person, very soft-spoken. He was quiet. He was not, pounding the table loud, that speech at the end, which I thought was very powerful, but that wasn't his manner. His manner was very low-key, almost intellectual. But you could see he was extraordinarily smart and passionate and completely devoted to the Jewish people. It was almost like he didn't have any personal life or any other aspect of his life. It was all about this. This is all he talked about. But he was a different he had a certain charisma, even with a couple of people talking to him, and even talking very, very softly.
Hi, I'm not sure if this works. As far as anecdotes, I didn't know him, but my wife and I, a friend from Boston, we moved here in the 80s. This is not going to work.
So he was J.D. Elnick. He was an Irish Catholic boy, converted to Judaism, married an Iraqi Jewish girl. And he said when he was with Kahane in the West Bank, what stunned him was that all the Arab shopkeepers came out and totally respected him, bowed down and gave him total respect. Probably they respected him more than the other leaders in Israel, which is the irony.
There is a story about him. He was a commander. He was in the reserves, even though he was older when he went there. And at one point, he was given control of certain areas in the Shomron, certain towns that he was responsible. There was no violence there. There was no rebellion there. There was no bloodshed there. There were no Arabs shot, killed, beaten, because there was no rioting, because they did respect him. These areas where the rioting was during the first Intifada in the late 1980s were the areas where they thought they could get away with it. In reality, the strength led to less violence and less dead people, Jews and Arabs.
It's That's not a personal anecdote. I just feel, in a very significant way, I owe my freedom, my opportunity to be here, to him. I was born in Odessa, Ukraine. I came here in '75, and I was raised by Robert here in LA. And it was clear to me then, it's clear to me now, but it is not clear to my children what it took for me to be free to say what I have to say. It is not clear to me why they would not read this book. Every book of Meir Kahane was translated into Russian. So my question is, actually two, look at the audience. How many people under 25 do we see here? And why? Maybe part of the excellent question you asked. Rhetorical question. What's our responsibility for making sure that whatever values that we feel are important for our survival are passed on to our generation? I couldn't do it here. I'm not standing on some sort of a... So forgive me for bringing my family, even though there was an injunction against it. Here's my question. Do you see in the demonization of the Russians in Israel, and particularly of Avigdor Lieberman, that has spread a repeat of the Jewish establishment response to the phenomenon of a Jew being stolen?
Absolutely. The Israeli government and the leaders are just as frightened of powerful Jews as they are here. By the way, a story, there was a member of the Knesset named Michal Ben-Ari, who was in the Knesset the last time, he didn't make it this time, who I invited to come speak at a ZOA event here in Los Angeles. He was not allowed into the United States because he had 25 years ago, been part of the Kach party with Kahane, and the State Department refuses to give him a visa to allow him into the United States. Now that's the United States State Department, as if he's a threat to anybody, considering who we let in there. But yes, I do believe, especially the media in Israel, the legal elite, the universities, and the media will demonize any strong Jew. One of Lieberman's ads, campaign slogans, was he speaks Arabic. He understands them, they understand him, and he's labeled as a racist.
My question goes to the problem of the colleges. I was a volunteer for Hillel here in the Valley, and I had to quit because they were so liberal that during the Lebanon conflict, they sent care packages to the Lebanese children instead of the Israeli children. Also a supporter of Stand With Us, and I know all the great work that they do in the colleges. But my point is that there are Hillels in every college. And if there was some way, maybe they have been approached to see if they could become more conservative. They've got the infrastructure, and can you think of any way that you can make Hillel be more conservative and educate these young college kids that need so badly to be educated?
Hillel is good to offer bagels and lox to kids and to have Shabbat dinner and for social events and to meet other Jews to date. They're not going to take a strong political position. By the way, in the Kahane's time, he did have a lot of young people on the campuses. It appealed because it was strong. It took a principled position. It was revolutionary, which is what kids want. It wasn't cautious and afraid. They did attract young people and college kids back then. The more milquetoast, the more they straddle the middle, the more you don't stand anything, you lose the young people. I don't know for sure. I suspect if there was an unapologetic Jewish pride movement, Jewish self-defense, another Beitar type of movement, that it would attract college kids because they could feel proud of what they're doing, proud of themselves, and proud of their people and proud of the group. I don't think it's going to be Hillel. I think it has to start almost from scratch.
Well, I've been particularly nauseated by this latest round with John Kerry and 108 prisoners and dealing with somebody who, if it was a Jew saying as if a Jew had said, let's get all of the Arabs out of Israel, it would be labeled as a racist. But yet the Palestinians' position is the second they get their state, they're going to kick all the Jews out of Israel. So I guess my question is, where have the people of Israel, where are they at in terms of reaching the level of nausea that I am at these endless stupid things about a two-state solution, when in fact they have a 22-state solution and they're shooting for 23, 24, and 25. And so where are the Israelis' people's heads at? Have they reached the level of nausea where they can turn to America and say, go away?
It's mixed. Look, they're not being led. There is no leader saying what's supposed to be said because he won't be allowed to say it. He'll be banned, he'll be called a racist, he could be arrested for that. The Israeli people, there are two conflicting emotions they have. One is a desperation for peace and to be normal. They become more Americanized, they want to live like us, they don't see any end to the conflict, they don't want their kids in the army, they served in the army. And my fear is if they even saw a mirage that looked like peace, they would do anything. If there's an announcement, they're talking about a referendum. If Netanyahu, God forbid, reaches a deal with Abbas, they'll do a referendum with enough media pressure and international pressure and advertising. They may vote for it because they're desperate and they might believe it. On the other hand, right now, they're also very cynical. They've seen this movie a few times before. They saw it in Oslo, and everybody was absolutely inebriated with the concept of peace. And it didn't work, and it led to more Jews being murdered and maimed as a result of the Oslo Accords. They saw what happened in 2000 when Barak, who was very left-wing, went to Camp David and was going to give virtually everything away. And Arafat not only walked away, he started a second intifada, and there are buses blowing up, and cafes and pizza parlors. So they're very cynical, and they don't believe it. I think if somebody was strong enough to tell them the truth and lead the way and gave them a reason for optimism, they would follow it. People want hope. One of the things I always say is, it sounds pessimistic, but I'm actually not. I think Israel is in a very strong position, the status quo. When I talk about is, if you went 70 years ago and you talked to some Jew who was in a concentration camp and said 70 years from now there'll be an independent and very powerful Jewish state with one of the strongest militaries and a thriving economy when the rest of the world is struggling, advanced technologically and scientifically and agriculturally, but there'll be some terrorism and wars and they'll have to fight and they won't ever be totally relaxed. That Jew in the concentration camp would say, that's impossible, that's fantasy land, that's a miracle, they'd sign up for it. But that miracle has occurred, we've made that progress, and if we continue to be strong, it can be even better. And I think if people can package that message and sell it to Israel, that if they're strong, they can continue to do well, but it's not going to be easy. They can't relax. Being a Jew means that you're never going to be totally accepted by the rest of the world. For some reason, anti-Semitism is in the human DNA. So the Jew among nations is also going to be singled out. But if it's persistence, they can win. They have been winning. I think if that message comes across, the Israeli people have enough sense to know they've been led down the wrong path before. I do have some concern that if a deal is reached and they put it up to a referendum and there's enough public relations pressure, who knows, they'll vote for it. The latest polls say they won't. But there needs to be a Kahane, somebody who will say what needs to be said, that the Arabs are not going to accept an infidel Jewish state and what they consider to be holy Muslim land. This isn't a territorial issue. If it was territorial, land would have been divided decades ago. That's not what it's about. It's religious and existential. They can't accept a Jewish state if it was the size of this room. So if the Jew, unless we want, the only way to get peace is by dying. We're not going to do that. If somebody will say that and push it, and I think people would accept it, but there needs to be a messenger.
This is a two-part question. We're saying that there's nobody after Kahane, but I think Nachum Shifrin I've heard him speak. Wouldn't you say he's like Kahane?
No. No. You talking about Rabbi Schifrin here? Yeah, I like him very much. I do happen to like him, but he's not there. I like him personally. But he's not in any position of prominence. There are other people who agree with Kahane, including Schifrin. I like him, but he hasn't, for some reason, taken off.
And the other question is regarding the Haredi that are punishing Orthodox women by making them sit in the back of the bus. Isn't that like what the South had when they made blacks sit in the back?
Look, I think the Haredim are a problem, and a lot of them are anti-Zionist. Not all of them. They can't be lumped into one category. They do need to perform their service. They need to be in the modern age. They're not the threat that the Arab world and the anti-Semites. They're a burden. They're a problem. They're not contributing. You know, I think they. If I were a parent and my child were in the Israeli army and there was ultra-Orthodox, they're not going in, it would anger me. I think it's unfair, but that's not the existential threat. The existential threat is from the Arab world that still wants to murder the Jews.
I'm Steve Bolton here. Excellent presentation. I grew up in Far Rockaway, and Rabbi Meir Kahane spent the summers in Far Rockaway, and I walked into shul every Shabbos and back. He spoke at my bar mitzvah. Somebody asked for a personal anecdote. I was wondering if I could share with you what Rabbi Meir Kahane said at my bar mitzvah. Someone from the Orthodox Jewish community where I was from in New York was critical about his pro-Israel staunch position. And Rabbi Kahane turned to this ordained rabbi and said, "You don't believe the very Torah that you study." And the rabbi was stunned. Rabbi Kahane said, if you look at the first sentence of the Torah, which starts with God creating the world, there's a commentary called Rashi. And the first Rashi of the entire Torah says, why did God start the Torah with Genesis and not with laws, since it's a law book? And the first Rashi in the Torah says, when the Gentiles claim that Israel is theirs, the God who created the world gave Israel to the Jews. So we're establishing a foundation that the God that gave Israel to the Jews is the God that created the world. And he silenced that rabbi.
My question is, what do you think is in the U.S. Attorney's files in downtown Los Angeles today and this week about the Koch Party and the so-called right-wing Jews? What do you think that file says today, not 20 years ago, but today?
I don't want to guess. Look, I know the FBI was obsessed with the JDL. They were obsessed with Kahane, and they were obsessed with Irv Rubin. They labeled the Jewish Defense League a terrorist group. They did it for political reasons because they didn't want to just label Arab groups. They said, we've got to name a Jewish group too. So they labeled that. How active, I'm not going to guess, but I'm not going to guess, but I would be surprised if they're not paying attention. And if there were ever to be an active Jewish Defense League again, it would probably be watched pretty carefully, if only for political correctness, because they wouldn't want to look, don't want to look like they're only singling out the Arabs. But Kahane was watched very carefully. Rubin was watched. They sent infiltrators in. They sent double agents in. And they were always looking for something to try to arrest somebody with, again, because they wanted it to look like they're balanced and not just picking on Arabs.
We're all being watched now.
To what extent do you think the phenomenon of young American Jews going to Israel to join the IDF is a function of the legacy of Meir Kahane?
I don't know if it's a direct legacy of Kahane, but I think it's a legacy of something good and something, a need that Kahane filled that's now not being met unless they have something to fight for. I think the young American Jews who become lone soldiers and go over to fight have the need to defend their people and to do something active and courageous and strong and where they feel they're doing something. The way they're doing it is the IDF. That's great, but there are other ways too. Kahane filled the same need from a more political and leadership point of view. I doubt how many of these young people heard of Kahane or if they know very vaguely about him, so I don't think they listen to his teachings, but I think it comes from the same basic human instinct and the need to defend your people. But there's a reason that this evokes, Kahane evokes so much emotion. The people they're desperate. They're thirsty, they want somebody to fill this need for them. Young people have it, and some of us older people need it too.